Welcome to Audiobook 365 Stories.
It was a day in March. You should never start a story like this. No start could be worse. It is boring, plain, and simple, and it might just be a lot of words. But in this case, it is okay. The next paragraph, which should have started the story, is too strange and silly to show to the reader without a little warning. Sarah was crying over her menu. Think of a girl in New York crying over a menu card. To understand this, you might think that there were no lobsters left, or that she had promised not to eat ice cream during Lent, or that she had ordered onions, or that she had just come from a Hackett play. And then, all these ideas being wrong, you will please let the story continue. The man who said that the world was like an oyster, which he could open with his sword, got more attention than he should have. It is not hard to open an oyster with a sword. But have you ever seen someone try to open an oyster with a typewriter? Would you like to wait for a dozen open that way? Sarah had managed to open the shells with her difficult tool just enough to take a small bite of the cold, wet world inside. She knew no more shorthand than if she had just finished a course in typing at a business school. So, not being able to do shorthand, she could not work in an office. She was a freelance typist and looked for small jobs of typing. The best thing Sarah had done in her struggle with life was the deal she made with Schulenburg's home restaurant. The restaurant was next to the old red brick building where she lived in a small room. One evening, after eating at Schulenburg's cheap, 40-cent, 5-course meal, served as quickly as you throw 5 baseballs at a man's head, Sarah took the menu with her. It was written in very messy handwriting, not in English or German, and it was so mixed up that if you weren't careful, you started with a toothpick and rice pudding and ended with soup and the day of the week. The next day, Sarah showed Schulenburg a nice card with the menu beautifully typed, with the food listed nicely from appetizers to not responsible for lost coats and umbrellas. Schulenburg decided to become a citizen right away. Before Sarah left, she got him to agree to a deal. She would make typed menus for the 21 tables in the restaurant, a new menu for each day's dinner, and new ones for breakfast and lunch whenever there were changes in the food or when the menus needed to look neat. In return, Schulenburg would send 3 meals a day to Sarah's room, brought by a waiter, hopefully a polite one, and give her each afternoon a handwritten list of what food would be served the next day. Both Sarah and Schulenburg were happy with the agreement. The people who ate at Schulenburg's restaurant now knew what the food they ate was called, even if they didn't always understand what it was. And Sarah had food during a cold, boring winter, which was the most important thing for her. Then the calendar said that spring had come, but it was not true. Spring comes when it comes. The frozen snow from January was still hard like rock in the streets. The street musicians still played, in the good old summertime, with their December energy and style. Men started to write 30-day checks to buy Easter dresses. The building workers turned off the heating. When these things happen, you know that the city is still in winter. One afternoon, Sarah shivered in her small but nice bedroom. The house is warm, very clean, has all conveniences. You must see to appreciate. She had no work to do except Schulenburg's menu cards. Sarah sat in her squeaky willow rocking chair and looked out the window. The calendar on the wall kept saying to her, "Spring is here, Sarah. Spring is here, I tell you. Look at me, Sarah. My numbers show it. You have a neat figure yourself, Sarah, a nice springtime figure. Why do you look out the window so sadly? Sarah's room was at the back of the house. Looking out the window, she could see the windowless back brick wall of the box factory on the next street. But to her, the wall was like clear glass, and Sarah was looking down a grassy path shaded with cherry trees and elms and surrounded by raspberry bushes and Cherokee roses. Spring's real signs are too small to see or hear. Some people need to see the blooming crocus, the dogwood trees in the forest, the sound of bluebirds, or even something obvious like the last goodbye of the winter foods like buckwheat and oysters before they can welcome the green leaves of spring. But for people who are close to nature, there are clear, sweet signs from spring telling them they are special and will not be left out unless they want to be. The previous summer, Sarah had gone to the countryside and loved a farmer. When writing a story, never go back like this. It is not good writing, and it makes the story less interesting. Keep moving forward. Sarah stayed 2 weeks at Sunnybrook Farm. There she fell in love with Farmer Franklin's son, Walter. Farmers have been loved and married and moved on in less time. But young Walter Franklin was a modern farmer. He had a telephone in his cow shed, and he could figure out exactly what next year's wheat crop in Canada would do to potatoes planted under a new moon. It was in this shaded and raspberry-lined path that Walter had courted her and won her heart. And together, they sat and made a crown of dandelions for her hair. He had praised a lot how the yellow flowers looked against her brown hair, and she had left the crown there and walked back to the house swinging her straw hat in her hands. They were going to get married in the spring, at the very first signs of spring, Walter said. And Sarah came back to the city to work on her typewriter. A knock at the door made Sarah stop dreaming about that happy day. A waiter had brought the rough pencil draft of the home restaurant's menu for the next day, written in old Schulenberg's messy handwriting. Sarah sat down at her typewriter and put a card between the rollers. She was a quick worker. Usually, in an hour and a half, the 21 menu cards were written and ready. Today, there were more changes on the menu than usual. The nice feeling of spring filled the entire menu. Lamb, which had recently played on the green hillsides, was now being served with a sauce that celebrated its lively jumps. The sound of the oyster, though not gone, was getting softer. The frying pan seemed to be resting behind the good bars of the broiler. The pie list got longer. The heavier puddings were gone. The sausage, wrapped in its covering, barely stayed with the buckwheat and the sweet but soon-to-be-gone maple syrup. Sarah's fingers moved like tiny flies above a summer stream. She worked her way down through the courses, placing each item where it belonged according to its length with a careful eye. Just above the desserts came the list of vegetables: carrots and peas, asparagus on toast, the usual tomatoes, corn, succotash, lima beans, cabbage, and then Sarah was crying over her menu card. Tears from deep sadness filled her heart and gathered in her eyes. She put her head down on the little typewriter stand, and the keyboard made a rattling sound that went along with her wet sobs. She had not received a letter from Walter in 2 weeks, and the next item on the menu was dandelions. Dandelions with some kind of egg. But who cares about the egg? Dandelions, whose yellow flowers Walter had used to make her his queen of love and future bride. Dandelions, the first signs of spring, the crown of her sorrow, reminder of her happiest days. Madam, I dare you to smile until you go through this test. Imagine the marital Neil roses that Percy brought you on the night you gave him your heart being served as a salad with French dressing right before your eyes at a Schulenburg table d'hôte. If Juliet had seen her love gifts treated this way, she would have sooner turned to the forgetful herbs of the good pharmacist. But what a magician spring is! Into the big, cold city of stone and iron, a message had to be sent. There was no one to deliver it but the little, strong messenger of the fields with his rough green coat and simple look. He is a true adventurer, this dandelion, this lion's tooth, as the French chefs call him. In flower, he helps in love-making, worn in my lady's brown hair. Young and not yet blossomed, he goes into the boiling pot and brings the word of his queen. After a while, Sarah stopped crying. She had to write the cards. Still in a soft, golden glow from her dream about dandelions, she touched the typewriter keys slowly for a little while, with her mind and heart in the grassy lane with her young farmer. But soon, she quickly came back to the busy streets of Manhattan, and the typewriter began to make noise and move fast like a car driving over bumpy roads. At 6 o'clock, the waiter brought her dinner and took away the typewritten menu. When Sarah ate, she pushed aside, with a sigh, the dish of dandelions with its egg on top. Just as this dark plan had been changed from a bright and love-filled flower to a plain vegetable, her summer hopes had also faded and died. Love may, as Shakespeare said, live on itself, but Sarah could not make herself eat the dandelions that had once decorated the first special dinner of her true love. At 7:30, the couple in the next room started to argue. The man in the room above tried to find the A note on his flute. The gaslight got a little dimmer. 3 coal trucks started to unload, the only noise that could compete with the sound of a phonograph. Cats on the back fences slowly moved away. By these signs, Sarah knew it was time for her to read. She took out The Cloister and the Hearth, the best book that was not selling well that month, put her feet on her trunk, and began to follow the story with Gerard. The front doorbell rang. The landlady answered it. Sarah left Gerard and Dennis stuck up a tree by a bear and listened. Oh, yes, you would listen just like she did. Then a strong voice was heard in the hall below, and Sarah jumped up from her door, leaving the book on the floor and the first round easily won by the bear. You have guessed it. She reached the top of the stairs just as her farmer came up, taking 3 steps at a time, and hugged her tightly, with nothing left for anyone else. Why haven't you written? Oh, why? Cried Sarah. New York is a pretty big city, said Walter Franklin. I came in a week ago to your old address. I found out that you went away on a Thursday. That made me feel a bit better. It took away the chance of bad luck on Friday. But it didn't stop me from looking for you with the help of the police, and in other ways since then. I wrote, said Sarah, strongly. Never got it. Then how did you find me? The young farmer gave a big, happy smile. I stopped by that home restaurant next door this evening, he said. I don't care who knows it. I like a dish of some kind of greens at this time of year. I looked down that nice typewritten menu looking for something like that. When I got below cabbage, I turned my chair over and yelled for the owner. He told me where you lived. I remember, sighed Sarah happily. That was dandelions below cabbage. I'd recognize that odd capital W that your typewriter makes anywhere in the world, said Franklin. Why, there's no W in dandelions, said Sarah, surprised. The young man took the menu from his pocket and pointed to a line. Sarah recognized the first card she had typed that afternoon. There was still the spot in the upper right-hand corner where a tear had fallen, but over the place where the name of the meadow plant should have been, the memory of their golden flowers had made her fingers hit the wrong keys. Between the red cabbage and the stuffed green peppers was the item. Dearest Walter, with hard-boiled egg.